Rise and shine is the DailyXander number 38. Just rose out of bed, get my day started, get some breakfast, and get to it with a couple hours due to my test review, and then hopefully get some sunshine, hitting some golf balls. So more to come. What is good? Back to the DailyXander number 38. It is around 11:45 in the late morning. I am just on the top of a parking structure on the top floor, getting some sun while I also listen to a few podcasts. And after I'm getting done filming my thoughts here, I am going to do some skating down of the parking structure. And so yes, I've just spent the past hour and a half doing some test questions on my review. I have about 23 left now, and then I was also listening to podcasts while I was doing the review, and then on my way to the parking structure and walking around a little bit on top floor to get some sun, I was listening to some podcasts too. And I just like to say, I like to provide myself stimulus that allows me to get different insight on other people's perspectives, whether that be through podcasts, so audio, or visual through video, or actual physical interaction, whether it be one-on-one or small group, large group kind of interactions like that. I just find I certainly can take a lot away from those type of stimulations as far as lessons learned from them, their perspective, apply it to my own perspective. I certainly always get an appreciation for what I have based off any type of perspective I often listen to. And I obviously have set stuff I like to listen to, but I always like to listen to different areas. A couple of the podcasts I listened to today so far were from TED Talks. Three different ones. They kind of operate in a format of about 15 minutes long, so they're short and sweet speeches that were given. So the first one was of a guy who at the age of 12 had a brain disease. He didn't mention what it was, but essentially this disease cut off his ability to move and to speak. So essentially for years on end, he suffered a low quality of life based off he didn't have these senses of touch, the ability to move, the ability to communicate with others and develop a loving relationship with others. But then it all changed when he was given a computer similar to what you would see Stephen Hawking use, where he could type in his thoughts, what he wanted to communicate to others, and this device speak his words out loud for him. And just the way he communicated and his choice of words throughout that speech were very interesting and very narrative, in the sense like he painted a good picture of what he was dealing with, and I could certainly sympathize for a person like that, most definitely. The next person I listened to, I don't remember much of her background, but she was coming up, she was explaining the concept of, rather than asking people where they're from, ask, where are you local? And she was more talking about growing up. Sure, we're all kind of from like these sovereign states, being like certain countries, but where are you from, particularly in that small pocket of that country a lot of times. So for her example, she was saying, I'm from Brooklyn or whatever, so a small portion of the US. So she doesn't consider herself an American in the United States. She considers herself a person from Brooklyn, and within that whole aspect of being from Brooklyn, it goes even smaller in depth, like a small neighborhood, I'm sure, of Brooklyn. So we're all essentially all products of our environment. So for me, instance, I'm a product of 18 years growing up in Alaska, but I don't really consider myself an Alaskan. I consider myself more of a person who grew up in the city of Anchorage for 18 years, not having tremendously amount of interactions and experiences outside of Anchorage when you compare the two, being most of my time in Anchorage versus other places of Alaska. And then from there, 3.5 years in the northern part of Arizona, which would be Flagstaff. So I'm local to both Anchorage and Anchorage and Flagstaff for my experiences that shaped a bit of who I am. And then from there, about 5 months in Sydney, Australia. And then even within Sydney, Australia, I'm not local to Sydney. I'm local to a couple of the small neighborhoods that make up Sydney, which would be Randwick and Kensington, where I spent most of my time in Australia. And then now the past 4 months in Orlando, Florida. And then even within Orlando, I'm not local to Orlando. I'm more in the small neighborhood of Maitland and Winter Park, which again are neighborhoods or smaller, I guess you could call them towns within Orlando. So being in those environments shaped more of who I am. And it's kind of playing off what she was saying. I know I probably botched a lot what she was saying, but that's what I took from it, I should say. I'm going to also say this is a good instance for me to practice my takeaways from people's perspectives. That's the main thing I took away from it, and that's stuff I've thought about before. Going back to we're products of the environment we grew up in, or we experience. And the last podcast I just listened to was a man who's an amputee, so he lost both of his lower limbs and one, I believe it was his right portion of his left upper limb, so half of his arm was gone and both of his legs were gone, coming from an electrical accident where when he was a lot younger he was on top of I want to say it was one of those electrical trains. So I guess one of those, a trolley essentially. So you'd see in bigger cities trolleys that operate on overhead electrical cables that power them, so they go through the cities. I think he climbed on top of one of those late at night, some with his friends one time. And anyways, to sum it up, he somehow got in contact. His body got in contact with electrical wires and essentially blew off his limbs that way. But he was talking about the medical system in the U.S. and how obviously it needs to change, but he went more in depth. I mean, a lot of people could say there needs to be changed, but you can say that with anything. You can say, oh, this needs to improve or this doesn't need to improve, kind of thing, and give your own spiel. But he went, his viewpoints stem more on a first-hand basis of him dealing with patients and just more of the human side to it all. Trying to think of my takeaway I would want to say from it. I definitely like how he described that hospital systems were designed and set up for treating for acute diseases, acute injuries, acute health issues, and not set up for people to live there for long periods of time. That you find nowadays, a good population, of course, are hampered by all these different types of diseases now, as we've aged and evolved as a society. So, kind of went in depth as far as the environment you find with a lot of hospital settings, all these beeping machines, and kind of played off of that I guess I can make the comparison of that saying where if a tree falls in the woods, does anybody hear it? Well, if somebody dies in a hospital setting, I guess I shouldn't go that far, but if somebody dies in a hospital setting, the machines are still running, so they don't acknowledge that somebody died. And so essentially, did that person even exist? I guess you could say. But interesting stuff. Again, I'm sure I botched a good portion of what all three of them were saying, but those are the takeaways I got from it. And I guess I'm viewing it from, if you look at a painting, there's over 1 million different things you can get from just looking at a painting. You ask a million different people, you get a million different answers. So that's what I'm taking from these podcasts. My own takeaways, of course, other people get different, and I'm sure what they're putting out, not everybody's going to grasp how the speakers are communicating to them. But that's the whole beauty of just taking in different information, one by one, get different things out of it. Anyways, those have been some few thoughts that have come to mind. Go for a skate session, 10-minute video. Oh, done and dusted right there. I'm gonna have to do a part 2 to my day here. More to come. Keep staying happy.